In all my years as a forensic pathologist in Berlin, I had received all kinds of bodies, some mutilated, others destroyed by accidents, bodies with mortal wounds, pulverized bones, and even decapitations. But none of those experiences prepared me for what I was about to discover when these strange bodies arrived at my office. I knew they concealed something terrifying, something that defied all imaginable logic. My name is Heinrich Müller. I'm 31 years old, and in 1971 I had already been working for 3 years in the office of the Chief Medical Examiner of Berlin, located in Mitte. I started there in 1968, a routine job that soon became my life. My work was simple. I documented each case that came into my hands in a folder, everything meticulously ordered, with precise dates and data on each event. During those years, I saw everything, from natural deaths to the most horrible tragedies, bodies that had suffered terrible accidents. But in 1971, nothing would prepare me for what I would see. Strange bodies started arriving, bodies that defied everything I had learned, everything I believed possible. These bodies were not normal. They defied all logic and understanding. They were something more, something I had never seen before in all my years in the morgue. And now, after so many years of silence, I will finally tell you what these bodies really were, what I discovered in them, and how they unveiled a secret so dark that it changed my life forever. These bodies were not of this world. I had started my night like any other. I remember that day very well. It was a Thursday in 1971. By then, I had been working in that morgue for about 3 years and a bit more, providing my services as an autopsy technician. Everything was so normal. The smell of formaldehyde permeated the air. That night I arrived at the morgue at 6 in the evening, as usual. I wore my white coat well adjusted. As every night while observing the wall clock, it was 10:37 at night, and the morgue was quieter than usual, something rare in a place like the Chief Medical Examiner's office in Berlin. Each body that entered, each autopsy I performed, was part of a routine that I had learned to master. I felt something different in the air, although I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Perhaps it was the way the silence seemed heavier than normal, or the way my thoughts resisted staying still. I was arranging my tools when I heard the echo of footsteps in the hallway. I looked up just in time to see the morgue door open. It was 2 men. One was a man of about 60 with a serious countenance, and the other was a young, dark-haired man. I think he was about 20 years old. They arrived at the morgue and introduced themselves as BND agents or something like that, and asked me if I had seen anything strange around there. I replied no, and specifically asked them what strange things could be. The older man looked at me fixedly and told me, without beating around the bush, that if I saw anything strange, I shouldn't hesitate to call the number on the card he then gave me. The card had a number. I kept it. I told them yes, that I would let them know, only I didn't know what things there could be. I thought they were referring to things like thefts or something. I didn't give it importance and threw the card in my toolbox. From there, I sat in my chair thinking about these men. I was a little disturbed and scared. I remember thinking that maybe there was a killer on the loose, so I tried to lock up, but there was no point. The next night, I was sitting in my office. No body had arrived yet. It was close to 10:50 at night when I heard a commotion outside. Without wasting time, I went out to see what it was about, although with fear, especially because of those men who had come the night before. As I went out, I encountered a tall man with graying hair and a severe expression who entered the room. He wore a long, dark coat, and there was something about his presence that put me on guard immediately. Behind him, 2 assistants pushed a gurney covered with a black body bag. This man raised his identification and then put it away. I didn't manage to see his name or badge as he quickly put it away. I began to suspect him, doubting that it was a real identity, especially because BND agents had come the night before. I thought this man could be the thief I imagined, but then he told me with slight authority, "Hey, keep quiet and follow me." Then he asked me if I had been visited by two men in suits. I replied yes, and he warned me that those men were not who they claimed to be. He didn't explain exactly who they were, but he insisted that if they came back, I should tell them I hadn't seen anything strange. I remembered that those men never showed me any identification, so I ended up believing this man more, who introduced himself as Frank Schmidt, a real BND agent. He added, telling me that he had a body he wanted me to examine. Something in his voice told me it wasn't a request. "What do we have here?" I asked, trying to sound professional while my mind started formulating questions I knew I shouldn't ask. "Something out of the ordinary," Frank replied, his words calculated. "I don't want this to be recorded in any official document. It shouldn't appear in your books, Heinrich. This case is confidential." I felt a chill run through me. I nodded, not because I fully understood, but because I felt I should. Frank gestured to the assistants to leave the gurney in the center of the room. When they left, he approached the body and lowered his voice. "Do the autopsy, but don't talk about this with anyone. When you're done, I want you to report to me and only to me. Understood?" Curiosity overcame my fear. I've handled strange cases before, but something in Frank's look made me feel this was different. I approached the gurney and pulled the zipper of the black bag. I saw that it was an apparently normal body, a man of about 70 years old lying on the gurney. He was dressed casually, with a shirt, common pants, and a black shoe. Everything seemed to be in place. I looked at the people and said, "I don't see anything strange about this man. I receive people like this every day. What's strange here?" You almost gave me a heart attack. Agent Frank looked at me so seriously that it scared me and said, "Just do the autopsy and then tell me what you find. I'm going to leave now and I'll be back tomorrow. Meanwhile, make sure to keep the body out of sight of the men in black suits." "Understood. No problem," I replied. The agent left and I approached the body. Without injecting formaldehyde, I began with a small incision in the lumbar area, and I swear to God I wish I hadn't made that cut. When making the incision, a nauseating gas emanated from the body, followed by a thick grey liquid that splashed my coat and the floor. I cursed while covering my face with my hands. The smell penetrated even through the mask I was wearing. I ran to the bathroom, took off my coat and hung it up. Then I washed my hands, took the cleaning products, and went back to clean the floor. When I returned to the bathroom, I noticed that the parts of the coat where the liquid had fallen were corroded, as if they had been in contact with acid. I went back to the body, this time with 2 masks instead of 1, and continued with the incision. It was a repulsive experience. I tried to prevent that disgusting liquid from touching my hands. After draining all the fluid, I managed to open the body, and what I saw was something I could never have imagined. When cutting the layers of skin instead of finding muscles, I discovered a greasy substance, similar to animal fat. Then I put my hand in to look for the organs, and instead of the kidneys, adrenal glands, and part of the large intestine, there were only some greenish tubes connected to each other. I remember saying over and over again, "What the hell are you?" Very amazed as I touched the different parts of that body, I found it hard to process what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was a joke, a fake body, but I quickly discarded that idea. Not knowing what to do, I started taking detailed notes and recording an audio describing everything I observed. At that moment, I thought about the possibility that it was something extraterrestrial, although I had never believed in those things. Still, I didn't know what else it could be. I decided to take some samples. I knew I was risking a lot, but I couldn't let all this disappear without a trace. While cutting small fragments of the tissue and storing them in vials, a part of me knew that I was crossing a dangerous line. However, the need to understand overcame the fear. While labeling the samples, I heard a metallic sound behind me. I turned quickly, my heart racing. The autopsy room door opened and Agent Frank Schmidt entered, his eyes fixed on the body. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his posture that I didn't like. "What have you found, Heinrich?" His voice was firm, but there was something in his tone that made me even more nervous. I took a breath, trying to sound professional. This is not normal, Frank. This body is not human, at least not entirely. The organs, the bone structure, everything is very wrong." Frank nodded slowly as if he already knew. He approached the body and observed it in silence for a few seconds before turning to me. "You already knew about this?" I asked. It was then that he revealed something surprising to me. This man was my neighbor. He moved to the neighborhood a few months ago. Since then, I noticed strange things, like intense lights that shone at night and woke me up almost always at the same time. In addition, this man received visits from those men dressed in black, always a few minutes after the lights appeared and disappeared. These events put me on alert, so I decided to investigate this subject. A few days ago, I found him lying in the yard of his house. I didn't hesitate and brought him here before the men in suits appeared. "You know what I think? I think this is an alien," he added. I turned pale. My suspicions were true. This man, or rather, this thing, was not from this planet. It took me half an hour to explain to Frank the details of the autopsy. His eyes were fixed on the creature as he said to me, "I want you to hide this body in a place where no one can find it. Do you understand? If they discover that we know something, we could be in danger." I remember thinking, why the cag was he making me part of this? I didn't want to get involved in this. All this was a ndi. I began to fear for my safety, but I couldn't do anything. I was already involved. I went to the most remote refrigeration chamber of the morgue. I stored it there. Before closing the body, I noticed a small hole in the temple that seemed to be from a bullet, slightly disguised with something that looked like makeup or something like that. I didn't give it much importance, as I felt a deep repulsion for that body. I put it in the refrigerator and left it there, relieved to have stored that thing. The next night I arrived at the morgue with a sense of dread. All day I couldn't stop thinking about the body that I had examined the night before, fearful that those mysterious men would appear at any moment to claim it. I approached the body several times, looking over my shoulder, expecting to hear the footsteps of those guys, but nothing happened. The night progressed slowly, and just when I was about to fall asleep at my desk, they brought me another body. It was a young teenager. They placed him on the gurney, and I began to work on him. I was absorbed in my work when, half an hour later, I saw Frank Schmidt standing in the entrance of the morgue. "What does this guy want now?" I thought to myself. He gestured for me to let him in, and so I did. To my surprise, he brought another body with him. This time, it was an older woman, about 45 years old. At first glance, she weighed around 80 kilos. The assistants placed her on a gurney, and Frank began to speak. "Here's another body, Heinrich. I want you to examine it," Frank said, his voice loaded with authority. I had no choice but to do it. Frank told me he would be back in 30 minutes, so I quickly stored the body of the boy that had arrived first and began to work with the new body. The first thing I noticed was something on her neck, a mark that extended along it, as if she had been strangled with something. The mark was slightly camouflaged with women's makeup. I didn't think much about it and began with the incision. Given what I had seen in the previous body, I wanted to start cutting at the height of the navel, hoping that strange liquid would flow again, but I didn't notice anything. This time, the body seemed normal. As I examined the body, I noticed that everything was in place. The organs were fine, everything seemed as it should. I remember thinking, "What the hell is this? I think this is actually a person." Upon saying that, I sighed with relief, but it didn't last long. I went to the head area and began to cut the skull. What I found there left me perplexed. The head was hard, as if it were made of a very resistant metal, but it had some joints where I could open the skull. This opened in two, and what I saw inside left me speechless. There was a small being, apparently alien, very thin, with large eyes and a disproportionately large head. It was sitting in the center of the skull, surrounded by mechanisms that seemed to control the movements of the body, but the being was already lifeless, which seemed a bit sad to see. I came to the conclusion that it was indeed a small alien that used this woman's body as a means of transport. Everything I saw told me that this technology was extremely advanced, even beyond what we could imagine today. I couldn't stop thinking about how incredible all this was. I was stunned, trying to process what I had discovered. Surprised, I went to write down and record everything I had seen. Moments later, Frank returned. I showed him everything, and he looked at me amazed. "This is amazing, Heinrich. I never thought extraterrestrial life existed on our planet. They hide it from us, but this must come to light. What do you think, Heinrich?" I hesitated to respond for a moment. I considered all the implications of what I had just discovered, but in the end I said nothing. I simply nodded. It was 2 in the morning when we heard someone coming. Frank told me to quickly store the body, and so I did, hiding it underneath where I had stored the first body. Luckily, it was just another patient. I received the body and worked on it until 6 in the morning. After that, I headed home, exhausted. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept spinning around everything I had seen, the bodies, the technology inside the woman's head, the little alien. They were things I couldn't easily digest. My brain wouldn't stop processing what I had witnessed. I tried to distract myself by reading about the Apollo X and the moon landing, trying to delve deeper into these mysteries. Finally, around 10 in the morning, I fell asleep, exhausted. When I woke up, it was already 5 in the afternoon. It was time to return to the nocturnal struggle. When I arrived at the morgue that afternoon, I was still amazed by everything I had discovered and a little scared, I admit. But there I was, determined to move forward, even though my intuition was screaming at me to withdraw. I made myself a coffee and sat down, waiting for a patient to arrive. It was a quiet night until, at 9 o'clock sharp, that idiot Frank burst into my precious peace. He brought 2 bodies with him, and without saying much, left them in the room. He was in a hurry, said he would be back in an instant, and left as quickly as he had arrived. I cursed out loud, frustrated by the interruption, and took the bodies to the room to begin studying them. I started with the first one, the corpse of an old man who had apparently died just minutes before. Looking at him closely, I realized that he had a strong blow to the back of the head. That scared me, but I continued with my work. When I cut him, I discovered that this corpse was of a normal man. Everything was in order. Organs, tissues, everything. Fearful of finding something strange in his head, I opened it carefully, and to my relief, it was completely human. "My God," I muttered. "This is a normal man." I sighed with relief and moved on to the second body, trusting it would be another routine case. However, when I began to cut, a horrible stench, equal to that of the first alien body, invaded the room. I shouted a curse and ran to wash my hands and change my coat. I returned to the body with a mixture of fear and determination. Upon examining it, I noticed immediately something different. It had no rectum or reproductive system. Intrigued, I cut deeper, and instead of the greenish tubes I had found before, this one was full of something that looked like asparagus, but much thicker and harder. I cut all parts of the body, and in each one I found the same structure, similar to asparagus. The entire body was made up of that material, from the feet to the neck. When I reached the head, something told me there was more to discover. When touching certain areas, the head came off easily, revealing a being hidden inside. It looked like a slug, but with an even more grotesque shape embedded inside the individual's head. I cut it completely and examined it. It was a hideous being, similar to a jellyfish, with connectors that joined the body from the neck. I began to document everything, writing and audio recording every detail I observed. This took me about 30 minutes. Afterwards, I went to the first cadaver, the old man's, which showed no signs of being extraterrestrial, and placed it nearby. When I went back to store the alien, I noticed something strange. A dense, dark smoke was coming from the door. I approached, but upon inhaling it, I began to feel dizzy and fell to the floor, unable to stay conscious. When I woke up, I still felt dizzy. I slowly got up and held onto the gurney of the body, which was now covered with a white sheet. I remember thinking, what the hell? I hadn't covered the body. I removed the sheet and horror invaded me. On the gurney was no longer the body of the alien being, but the body of Detective Frank, dead in the same place where the alien should be. I jumped in fright and noticed that there were several bullet holes in his chest, at least 6, maybe more. When I removed the sheet completely, a small piece of paper fell to the floor. I picked it up and read it. The message said, "This man ended up like this because he meddled where he shouldn't have. He deliberately murdered citizens of extraterrestrial origins to prove they really exist. They do exist and live among us as normal people." At the end of the note, my name was written in large letters. "If you don't leave this job, you'll end up like him, since you know too much about it." I threw the paper to the floor, feeling a mixture of terror and desperation. I ran to the containers where I had left the 2 bodies, but they were no longer there. My heart was pounding as I headed for the door to get out of there, but just as I was about to escape, I saw the older man, dressed in his black suit, waiting for me. I tried to apologize for what I had done, babbling words that I didn't even understand myself. He just looked at me, his eyes cold and empty, and then turned around and left without saying a word. I went back into the room to collect my files, but nothing was left. They had taken everything. I cursed out loud and ran from that place, feeling like I was getting out by the skin of my teeth. I went home, but couldn't sleep all night. I felt they were surrounding me, my house watching me, making sure I didn't talk. The next morning, I took all the money I had saved and moved to Austria. Today, so many years later, I reflect on what happened in that morgue. On the nights when I can't sleep, the memories of those bodies of Frank and the men in black suits come back to me with the same intensity. I wonder, what really happened? What dark secrets remain hidden under layers of bureaucracy and silence? Sometimes doubt still assails me. Did I make the right decision by fleeing, by abandoning everything? Perhaps I'll never know. What I do know is that the world keeps turning, indifferent to the hidden truths that remain buried in places like that morgue. The beings that control those secrets continue to operate in the shadows, and those who dare to uncover them pay a very high price. I was lucky, or perhaps cunning, to escape before it was too late. For years I kept silent, fearful that they would find me. I spoke, but time passes and with it fear fades. It no longer matters if they come for me. I have lived my life. I have left my legacy in something much simpler and mundane than music. And now, in the twilight of my existence, I feel it is my duty to share what I saw, if only so that someone somewhere knows the truth, because in the end, it is that truth that really matters. No matter how many years pass, the facts remain. They exist. They are here among us, living as normal people, waiting for the right moment to reveal their true nature. And when they do, the world will never be the same again.